Hey, what's up guys? Alex here with a new video, and today we're going to be doing my first impressions on the Canon EOS R3. I've owned this camera now for about 2 months, and I've roughly put around 4,000 photos on it, and I wanted to talk about my first impressions. As I do with all my videos, I'll be putting up images I shot with the camera throughout the video. All the images have been edited with my preset. If you're interested in that, feel free to click on the link in the description below. I will also be including these images as sample downloads for you to play with and get a good idea of how these files perform for yourself. As I do with all my reviews as well, I'm going to cover 3 things. I'm going to cover ergonomics and build quality, image quality, and autofocus. With that being said, let's kick things off. So, ergonomics and build quality. This camera is built like a tank, and I'm going to go ahead and say it is the best feeling Canon camera I have ever used. I used to use the Canon 1DX Mark II, and that camera was a tank. It was heavy and it was large. This camera feels very similar, but it feels smaller and lighter. Now, by no means is this a small camera. It feels smaller, and it is smaller than the 1DX Mark II, but it is not that much smaller. So I think when you hold a camera without a lens, you see how light the camera is and how good it feels in hand. This camera though does change when you put on a RF lens. So when you put on like the 50-1.2, the 85-1.2, the 70-200, the kit gets extremely heavy. Again, if you're used to shooting with the 1DX Mark II or Canon's old pro bodies, you have an idea of what to expect. But if you're new to those cameras, and this will be your first professional, quote unquote, Canon camera, it could be deceiving if you just pick up the body without a lens. Because like this, I can hold it all day long. You put on a freaking 2-pound lens, I think, all of a sudden it gets extremely heavy, and you know, it's manageable for an hour or two, but for a long day, it becomes a problem. Moving on though, the build quality is great. You have buttons everywhere, it's customizable, and like I said, it feels like a tank. To cover some cool features, this camera actually has light up buttons. I'm surprised that not every camera has this, so you can actually light up a few buttons at night so you can see what you're touching and kind of pressing, which is a very helpful feature. They also added a new smart controller. Now, Canon's been playing with different ways to move the autofocusing points. They started with the Canon EOS R, and I think they had I forgot what they called the touch bar, and now they added a smart controller in this camera and in the 1DX Mark III. I will say this, if you want to move an autofocusing point extremely quickly, the smart controller is very fast and very handy. I did find myself accidentally moving my finger through the smart controller just the way I grip the camera and moving my autofocusing point, so that became a bit of a hassle and I ended up just turning it off. I think with all new mirrorless bodies, specifically with Canon, for me, the way I shoot, the fastest way to move the focusing point or get something in focus is just by touching the screen. I will say, I don't use the viewfinder, which, don't kill me in the comments, it's just the way I shoot. I love holding my camera like this and I love using the big screen. I never use the viewfinder, so for me, if I want to focus somewhere else, it's just faster and easier to just tap on it. So the smart controller is cool, it's fast, but not for me just because I accidentally kept moving it. This camera also does have an incredible viewfinder. I just told you I don't use the viewfinder. I've used it a few times, it looks great, it's just not my style. I can't get used to this. I just shoot like this. Again, it's all preference, but I won't get too into detail as far as how great this viewfinder is because I just really haven't used it. Battery life on this camera is also great. I have yet to kill a battery. I've taken this camera out all day, I've shot pictures all day, and I've gotten to roughly 50%. Now, if you've seen the photos I'm taking, I'm not doing any event photography, I'm not doing any weddings, so I haven't really pushed it. More kind of documentary and just documenting my travels. I haven't had any battery issues. I will note that Canon does use the LPE19, and battery's great. The battery charger it comes with is absolutely massive, and when I first got it, I was like, there's no way I'm traveling with this charger. Luckily, this camera can charge via USB-C, so for me, I do not use the charger it comes with. I just directly plug it into USB-C and eliminate that massive brick. So, build quality, completely blown away by Canon as always. It feels great in the hand. It's solid. Zero complaints from a build quality perspective. I will note, I wish, and it would have made the camera a little bit larger, that Canon actually copied the Sony approach, because when you compare the R3 and the Sony A1, which is Sony's flagship camera, the A1 doesn't come with a built-in battery grip. It's an optional add-on. And I like that because you can pack the camera small, or you can put on the battery grip and add more juice and have a better grip. You have the option. When you compare this to the Nikon Z9, that camera is even bigger and heavier. I personally could not own that camera just because of its size. I think the Sony approach and model might be the way because you have flexibility. I love a lot of things about this camera, but the weight and size can be a deal breaker for some. And if you gave the option, you can kind of have your cake and eat it too. Moving on to image quality. This camera is packing a Canon designed 24 megapixel backside illuminated sensor, Canon's first, which means you can actually shoot with the electronic shutter and not necessarily get any warping in the image and just have usable images. You also get incredible low light performance. So this camera is using 24 megapixels, so it's not keeping up with like the Nikon Z9 or the Sony A1 at 50 and I think 45 megapixels, or are they both 50? They're both high-res megapixels, but you do get incredible low light and you do get speed. You have 30 frames per second with the electronic shutter, and with the latest update, I think you can do up to 200 frames per second, or it's something crazy I would never use. If you've used any of Canon's latest cameras, the R6, the R5, this camera has the same color science, and to me, Canon just has the best colors and easy files to work with, so no complaints. When comparing the high ISO with the R5 and R6, I personally think this camera is way better than the R5 in high ISO, as it should be. It's half the megapixels. With the R6, it's a close call. Honestly, I didn't see much of a difference. I think the R6 is an incredible camera and it's usable up to 12,800 ISO. This camera looked very similar. So even though you have an updated sensor and newer technology, I feel like the low light performance is on par with the R6, maybe slightly better, but nothing mind-blowing. But from an image quality perspective, even though it's 24 megapixels, it really didn't leave me desiring any more. Would I like a higher resolution sensor like the R5? Absolutely. But it's got incredible dynamic range, incredible colors, and as I was editing the files and getting the results, I had no complaints. So as far as image quality, 2 thumbs up. Again, no real big complaints. Moving on to autofocus, here's what's interesting. I've owned the R6 and the R5, and this is using Canon's latest autofocusing technology, which is supposed to be faster than the R5 and R6. And when you use the R5 and R6, it's kind of hard to think of a system being faster or better. Those cameras are great. So when I got this camera, I was like, all right, let's see what it's all about. And yeah, it is faster. This camera is just mind-blowing fast in everything it does. But as far as autofocusing goes, it's actually a little too fast. Out of the box, the camera's almost a little jumpy, just kind of quickly just acquiring focus at anything it sees. It's impressive, but at first it was a little confusing because my R5 and R6 didn't jump as fast to acquire focus at different things. I'll give you an example. I was shooting some pictures of my watch, and I was trying to focus on the actual brand logo. And again, this is a tough subject because reflections and glare were hitting the lens. So the camera would go from focusing on the watch face to focusing on the watch band, back to the face, back to the band, and it would do it in a matter of like split seconds. So it just kind of jumped back and forth, even though I had tapped the track on the actual watch face. With the R5 and R6, I never had that issue. What would happen is when the camera would lose the focus on the watch face with the glare or whatever's happening, it would just go out of focus and then reacquire focus. The R3 kind of just jumps at the next thing and acquires focus really quickly and then goes back to its main subject and acquires focus. Very interesting, but I ended up tweaking the settings to slow down kind of I forgot what the menu function is called, just to slow down the switching of subjects, and it's gonna fix the issue for me. But it goes to say, this is the fastest camera I have ever used. When it tracks something, not the watch of course, but like a face and an eye, it's just sticky. It makes shooting, easy. You can do it with your eyes closed. The autofocusing is that good. Overall, this camera is great. As far as complaints, I think I've already covered them. I wish Canon would have copied the Sony approach and made the vertical grip optional, because I would love to have this sensor, this technology, this experience in an R5, R6 body. Because for me, taking this camera everywhere I go and putting it in my backpack, after a few hours, it does get heavy. And where it gets super interesting here is, this is Canon's flagship model. They're not calling it the flagship model, but this is the best camera Canon makes. And we're actually in a super interesting time right now, because I don't think Canon's ever gotten to this point. When I used to own the 1DX Mark II, that camera did things significantly better than the 5D Mark IV, or did certain things significantly better. The autofocusing was significantly better. The video quality and the video codecs you can get, significantly better. So it had its kind of justification. Its speed, significantly better. But for the first time, I think, the R3 is the fastest Canon camera and does have the best autofocus. But the R5 and R6 don't have a bad autofocusing system. So even though the R3 is faster, that doesn't mean the R5 and R6 are slow. Those cameras are still leading in its class. So I think that the differences are so small now from autofocusing speed. I just mentioned low light being very similar to the R6. And the R5, you compromise a little bit on the low light, but you still get the speed, you still get great AF, but you get a higher megapixel sensor. So for the first time, this flagship model doesn't really stand out as much as previous flagship models have before. And maybe this is why Canon isn't calling the R3 the flagship model. So with that said, can I recommend this camera? Absolutely. I think if you're a sports photographer, action photographer, and you just need the fastest camera out in the market, it does not get better than the R3. If you're not doing those, I'm gonna say this. As much as I love this camera, I would pick up an R5 or R6. You might be able to pick up both for almost the same price, a little bit more money, and that would be a better combo than the R3. So those were my first impressions and thoughts on the Canon EOS R3. If you've used it, let me know your thoughts down below. As always, I love having conversations. If you don't want to leave your comment down below and you want to reach out to me on Instagram, I'm also including that in the description. Feel free to hit me up. Thank you for watching this video. Please give it a like, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Have a good one, guys. Peace.